saben y para quienes no llegan por primera vez a estas sesiones, en este momento se están discutiendo dos grandes instrumentos sanitarios a nivel internacional y uno es el Tratado de Pandemias para evitar repetir lo que pasó en la pandemia del COVID y una modificación al Reglamento Sanitario Internacional. Estas negociaciones se han ido llevando a cabo con la participación de los países. Sin embargo, hemos detectado varias dificultades porque, como siempre, hay un desbalance entre las capacidades de los países desarrollados y los países en vía de desarrollo. Estar informados de lo que está sucediendo es uno de los primeros pasos para poder entender y para poder exigir y tener capacidad de negociación. Y por eso estamos promoviendo estas discusiones dentro de la sociedad civil. ¿Cómo vamos a funcionar hoy? Tenemos grandes invitados el día de hoy, personas que han seguido de cerca las discusiones y que tienen mucha experiencia en cada uno de los temas que van a tratar. Tenemos como invitados a Gopakumar de Red del Tercer Mundo, quien nos va a comentar lo que se discutió la semana pasada en el proceso de negociación. Vamos a tener a Rachel Crockett de DNDi, que ella es gerente senior advocacy de la iniciativa de medicamentos para enfermedades olvidadas. Tenemos a Moga Kamal, que también nos va a contar un poco cómo van estas negociaciones. Y Luis Villarroel, que se va a concentrar en algunos temas específicos como propiedad intelectual, monitoreo del capítulo 3 del tratado y la transferencia de tecnología. Él es el director de Innovarte. Em, bueno, creo que no es más por el momento. Le cedo la palabra a Gopa Kumar. Adelante, Copa. Les recuerdo que tenemos traducción simultánea, entonces ustedes van a hacer clic en el mundo, la figurita del mundo que hay en la parte superior y van a elegir el idioma que ustedes prefieren y para que podamos hacer un seguimiento de la negociación. Tenemos aproximadamente 5 minutos para cada uno de los panelistas y luego pasaremos a una sesión de discusión y preguntas. Adelante, Gopa.
So thank you, Luz, and thank you all the participants for accepting our invite. So this is, as you know, the CNN says that Gopakumar from the ground zero. But joke apart. The negotiations, all of you know, that started last Monday. Let me getting into the details of the negotiation. So when we mention negotiation, a kind of image comes on your mind that is mostly text-based negotiations. So countries propose language and another country may propose deletion of that language, and they discuss, they try to arrive at a consensus and on each paragraph, and then they move forward. But that kind of negotiation has not started till date. So what they are doing is that they have taken the articles. Some countries suggest languages, but some countries just say that conceptually whether they agree or not agree, they put more suggestions, but none of these getting reflected on the screen. What the negotiators will see the proposed text by the bureau, certain paragraph, articles are proposed by the bureau, certain articles are proposed by the subgroups, and certain articles are proposed by certain countries who voluntarily come forward to discuss with countries and frame the language. So we have three kinds of text on different articles. So we do not have a consolidated draft negotiating text as such. So the text-based negotiation based on a negotiating text will start only in March. So what is the implication of that? That means as of now, there is only one more round of negotiation scheduled. That's in March, from 19th of March to 28th of March, 9 days. And the aim is to conclude the negotiation within 9 days and adopt the treaty by May. So this will be a world record in a way to have to conclude a negotiation of a treaty within 9 days. So it has its own implications. It could be on three ways. The first one is that there will be effort to force countries to compromise. Mainly, the victims will be the developing countries' demand for equity. So we'll be asked to uh, give on uh, obligations related to surveillance, and at the same time, the issues related to equity will be left out. So that's one implication could be. Second implication would be that member states may agree to adopt an agreement which they call framework agreement with most of language than nothing else on the ground, which may not have the legal uh, uh, force to translate or change the status quo. So that's a second implication. Third, they decide to uh, agree to have more time and negotiate further. But in any case, we are in a critical moment at this time, and the civil society organization, we have to take a stand whether we uh, go for a treaty with at any cost without looking into the content, or we do look at the content and we do say that content matters along with the deadline. So, or in other words, content matters more than the deadline. So this is the stand we may have to take in the coming days. So that's related to the process. And as of the last week, there were only two sessions, morning to evening, and today onwards there are three sessions. There is a night session. The negotiations conclude around 8:30 Geneva time. So this is going to be the schedule till Thursday, I guess. But there are certain changes in the negotiating. Tomorrow, I heard that they are going to negotiate the future steps before concluding discussions on other scheduled discussions. So this in terms of process. So now the three issues. There are other colleagues and friends. They were here. Mogha, etc., will explain to you in detail, but I would like to flag three issues which are hotly debated. One is PAPS issues. Every country, developing country, spoke during the opening plenary. Africa Group of Equity, Brazil, China, all spoke in favor of to have a pandemic access and benefit sharing system, which would enable equitable sharing of benefit emerging out of sharing of pathogens. That's the one issue. Second issue is equitable access to medical products during the pandemic. Developing countries would like to have a predictable access to health products. So these are the two issues they raised during the plenary. These issues were discussed. Article 12 was, that's a PAP system, was discussed. At least two informals and two subgroup settings. That was on Wednesday and Friday. Discussion were held. And on equity, there was a discussion on Article 10 and 11, 12 on Wednesday. So this is kind of gist of the discussion. And the contentious issues in terms of PAP system is that whether developing countries are saying that the system should be foolproof, there should not be any leakage in the system. Therefore, they are asking for WHO to establish its own database for holding the genetic sequence data of the pathogens, and also predictable benefit sharing, like 20% of the production should go free, and given to the WHO. 20% should be at affordable price, and even there are other benefits like technology transfer, which can be used for during an pandemic and a need for localized production. So these are the issues they are discussing. When it comes to equitable access, the main issue is that to have a designated production facility and technology transfer. If you have a designated production facility without technology transfer, it cannot function. So they would like to have a mechanism which ensures provide technology to designated facilities. So there are many other issues, but these are the broad issues which are under negotiation. They have not reached any consensus on any of these issues, and we need much more uh, oversight or scrutiny or monitoring of the civil society, what is happening here, and to tell our governments to stand by their stand on equitable access. And it's a time to convey the message crystal clear that without equity there should not be any treaty. I will also end by saying that there is a Nature has published a letter by scientists. Around 290 scientists signed on a letter saying that there is a need to have a equitable, fair and equitable benefit sharing mechanism. Without that benefit sharing mechanism, there is no point in having a pandemic treaty. So I'll urge you to read that letter. I'll paste it here. So now let me stop it here. Sorry, I have taken 2-3 minutes extra. But at the same time, I'll have to go now, but I'll be come back, join after a small meeting. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Gopa. Muy interesante. Gracias por hacernos esa aclaración de que las negociaciones en sí todavía no comienzan, sino en este momento se está tratando de ajustar un texto. Y muy importante que nos hagas caer en cuenta de la dificultad que hay de ajustar ese texto de forma equitativa para todos los países. Vamos a continuar con, bueno, las preguntas las vamos a hacer al final. Vamos a tener una sesión en la que podamos participar todos los asistentes y hacer las preguntas a los panelistas. Vamos a continuar con Rachel Crockett. Ella es gerente senior advocacy de DNDi. Adelante, Rachel.
Thank you, and thanks for having us. I think Gopa touched on a few aspects, and we are very aware that there are many issues at stake in this negotiation. And as an organization, we're DNDi, Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. We're a not-for-profit R&D organization. Clearly, many of these issues are of importance to us. But for the purposes of this discussion, given who else we have as speakers today, I'm going to focus on Article 9, which is on R&D, which is an important article, not the only article, but an important article to operationalize equity. I'm going to split these remarks into kind of 3 main points. The first is on process and the linkages between the different articles. The second will be about the content of Article 9 and where that's got to. And the third is some humble suggestions of where we think collective work from civil society organizations could be helpful going forward as we go into this week of negotiations, but also IMB 9 in March and whatever comes next from that. So the first is that Gopa touched on this, but what we've heard very strongly last week is that inevitably this accord is going to be, it's really about negotiating 2 or 3 key articles. Access and benefit sharing is one of them. Financing is the other. There's a few others that are really going to be central to this negotiation. And really until those articles, those central articles are agreed in some way, will then the finalization of many of the other articles really occur. So when you see maybe binding obligations such as shall right now, that can easily be changed to consider or promote, which is obviously less binding, or vice versa, depending on where they land on some of these real key topics that Gopa touched on as well. So everything's a trade-off. But I would also say that even with that in mind, it's still, the negotiations are still very, very siloed, and they're still being kind of negotiated article by article, even though we know that the linkages are incredibly important throughout. So if you take conditions on attaching conditions to public R&D funding as just one example, that's currently housed in Article 9 on R&D, but has massive implications for Article 11 on tech transfer and IP, on some of the access and benefit sharing provisions, on some of the supply chain provisions. So civil society really has a role there in helping the negotiators see the importance of how all of these pieces link together to fully operationalize equity in an end-to-end manner. The second, in terms of the content of Article 9 and where it's getting to, it's promising to see that the article has developed and improved in many ways since the last version of the text. You know, now we have certain provisions on early stage research, which was missing before, on priority setting for R&D, on conditions on public financing, which weren't there in the previous drafts. And it's even more promising that we're hearing that some member states may be willing to make some movements on certain provisions within this article. But we do see two kind of main issues coming up within R&D and how equity can be operationalized within R&D itself. The first is that we're concerned that there is still a push for a narrow focus on emergency response. And really, from our perspective, we think this really undermines or risks undermining the effectiveness of both Article 9 on R&D, but also the entire instrument if you just focus on emergency response and not on the preparedness, the prevention aspects that are also needed. Because we know that if you take COVID as an example, there was years of investment, sometimes decades of investment in R&D that in research prior to COVID that enabled the development of some of the health tools that we had. And we do need to learn from that. You need the research capabilities both to be able to be self-prepared and kind of have self-sufficient, but also to be prepared. And you need to be able to understand the pathogens and try to find the right health tools in advance so that we can then take those health tools into further trials when an emergency hits or an outbreak occurs. And without this kind of approach, you don't have this end-to-end approach from prevention, preparedness, and response that you need. And we're seeing potentially a push from some member states to really limit this to emergency use products. So we would just like to flag that. And the second is how government funders can use their own leverage when they fund R&D to ensure equity. Because you need the powers to be able to ensure that knowledge is shared so that research can be done quickly in an emergency and that there's equitable access to the end products and that can be ensured. And the funders of R&D can absolutely do that. And we see some real opportunities to take forward some of these proposals to bridge some of the gaps that we're seeing that Gopa mentioned, that there is kind of becoming a big divide in some of the content. But at the minute, that there is a provision on conditions attaching to public funding of R&D, but it's not very detailed on what the scope, what types of conditions could be. And we think that the next steps for member states this week, if they get to it, IMB 9 if they don't, is to focus on what those conditions should be and the kind of details within that. Because without agreement on that, you don't have coherence between funders, you don't have a baseline between of conditions that every funder is kind of attaching to have common expectations. So that's just brief content overview of Article 9. And third, quickly, just on some humble suggestions on where we think civil society could be incredibly helpful over the coming weeks and months ahead, from the fortunate position that we are in terms of being able to be in Geneva and be in the WHO to speak to negotiators. The first is that, without a doubt, an incredibly important role to keep talking about the need for specific commitments to change the status quo and advocating for equity. Because as the negotiations go into real kind of more specificity sometimes this gets lost in the detail, you know, and being able to take this back to a grounding on what this accord was meant to achieve in the first place, meant to make meaningful change the status quo, and have some concrete provisions that ultimately means that lives will be saved in the event of a future health emergency or pandemic. So that's the first. The second is that, of course, to be able to do that, you need to be able to see the documents. We all need to be able to see the documents, and we need to be able to be meaningfully engaged in the process. So that is incredibly important, without a doubt. But, and this is my final point, I do think that there's probably a need to recognize where the negotiations are at now, which is that they are now getting into real text-based specificity, and negotiators are asking for help on specific wording. Does this wording that's in here now really help change the status quo? Does it help make the changes that we want to see? And without kind of support from those organizations who have the capacity, I appreciate it's not an easy, or it's a very time-consuming role to play, but that's where the negotiations are shifting to now, real text-specific negotiations. So if there is ways of being able to provide that to negotiators, that is the reality of where the negotiators are at now. So that's I'll stop there, and we can have some more discussion in the Q&A. Thank you.
Gracias, Rachel. Claro que sí. Después de que pasen todos los panelistas y presenten, vamos a tener una discusión interesantísima. Todo lo que nos has contado y las sugerencias creo que son un punto esencial. Les recuerdo a todos los asistentes que nosotros estamos llevando una campaña, haciéndole seguimiento a este acuerdo desde PBA. No a la hipocresía se llama esta campaña, para que no permitamos que vuelva a suceder lo de siempre, la inequidad para el sur global. Y desde América Latina, Acción Internacional por la Salud, también y todo PBA Latinoamérica estamos enviando mensajes a través de las redes. Los invitamos a que los conozcan y se mantengan informados. Continuamos ahora con Moga Kamal. Ella es una persona experta en estos temas del tratado pandémico. Ella ha llevado un seguimiento muy detallado y bueno, Moga, tienes la palabra. Muchas gracias por estar el día de hoy con nosotros.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll talk about content and then process of some key art. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Adelante.
I'll talk about some content and a little bit of process. So on the content, I will talk about the key articles that are on access to products. Rachel talked about Article 9, Gopa talked about Article 12, but these are really essential. Article 9 is the research and development, 12 is access to pathogens and benefit sharing. Then there is Article 10, 11, and 13, and these between them cover local production, technology transfer, a little bit of IP, intellectual property, and basically distribution, creating a network for distribution of the product. Remember that during COVID, there was a Bill Gates, MasterCard, and Wellcome Trust created something called Accelerator. Then WHO came in, and it became the ACT Accelerator, which had COVAX as the biggest bit of it. And I have to say, COVAX failed Africa and Latin America as well. So, so the Article 13 is about something that will not do the same problem, I guess. So in a way, anyway, so the language in the three articles is not obliging, is not legally bound. It's all promoting and encouraging, and there's very little supporting even. So, you know, the Article 10 on local production. So how do you do local production without technology transfer, without removing IP barriers, and without sustained financing from developing countries and rich countries. It's not just a donor thing. So needs, remember, everybody's signing hopefully on this document, so everybody should contribute. It doesn't link, again, the linkage that Rachel was talking about, it doesn't link local production clearly to obligations on these three issues. So technology transfer is still kind of on as appropriate on mutually agreed terms. And I found this sentence or this clause is standard in all UN documents or any documents that talk about access to anything, not necessarily pandemic products. So basically leaving the decision in the hands of pharmaceutical companies, and therefore things stay as they are. So the point that Rachel made and Gopa and the others made about that the accord is about changing, is about protecting people and ensuring what happened in COVID and HIV before, remember, does not happen again. Well, if things stay as they are on technology transfer, local production, removing IP barriers, then how do you expect that there is a change? So I think on these three articles, there is particularly on 10 and 11, local production and technology transfer, which has a little bit about TRIPS flexibility and Doha Declaration. Again, the standard that they put in any document, something about supporting or something, or countries have the right to use the TRIPS flexibility according to the Doha Declaration. That's fine. But that's not enough to remove the barriers, because it doesn't really tackle the know-how or the pressure that countries face when they use the TRIPS flexibilities. The other article, so that the access and benefit sharing is related to Article 12, but there's others that are just as important in that particular thing about benefit sharing, which is the surveillance. So as Gopa said, as developing countries, the obligation is on developing countries to do surveillance, animal, human, and environment. Of course, we agree on that. You do need the surveillance. We don't know who's paying for it. And more importantly, you do surveillance, you put the stuff online or somewhere, basically share it publicly, and then there's no benefit coming. It's really, again, the linkages between various articles. That like surveillance doesn't look like it has anything to do with access to medicines, but it certainly does. On the article on, I'm just giving headlines, the article on finance, so that has, it doesn't have, for example, debt cancellation or debt restructuring or debt anything. And by the way, if we mention debt, I think we have to say with public scrutiny. So even if they cancel the debt, it just doesn't go and send air to our government budget. The public has to scrutinize where the money is going. So I think accountability here is important, but we don't have debt cancellation anyway or debt restructuring anyway. So in that one. Then on in processes, what I heard from last week, it was, some countries were saying, developing countries basically, that they, we're still on this in this situation, and they in this situation. So it doesn't seem there is, on the access article, the key access article, it doesn't seem there is concessions. And as Gopa said, the pressure is on developing countries to make concessions, but it doesn't seem that rich countries are making concessions. But I think they should be pressure, and here is our role. There should be huge pressure on them. Concessions this time should come from them. Concession on the WTO came from developing countries, and on many, many other things came from developing countries. This one, the concession should come from them. And I think, what's important, where we go next step. So they still, in theory, this week, they're still continuing to decrease the gap between the views. How they do it, I don't know. But then anyway, so at the end of the week, what comes out of that is critical, because in theory, at the end of the week, they should produce a document for negotiation. so that they said that last week that NB9 is the one where they put the text on the screen and they say add this, delete that. So there is no time except the March, the next one. And there was some talk about that they may need another session in April. That's okay, but the many countries talked about the importance of sticking to the deadline. I think we're really divided between, or my worry is that developing countries will be put in between. You either stick to the deadline, because after the deadline there's no political space for a pandemic treaty. Politicians have moved since COVID is not a pandemic. They moved out of COVID, out of any talk about pandemics. They're busy with Gaza and Ukraine and budget cuts and this and the other. So there's no political space for it. So you need, I think, I'm worried of repeating what happened at WTO. Delay the decision until end of the 6 months on medicine, then delay it until the US does this and the other. And of course, there's no decision after that. And they don't even want to say that it was a failure, even without saying who failed the rest. So there is that worry that we end up with something like that. On the other hand, so accept anything. So accept a framework that you discuss details in a COP. That means, you never get anything else or whatever. So yeah, between sticking to the thing or actually pushing to get a really useful document. We might not get everything we want, but at least we should push to get critical things accepted in the document. Thank you.
Gracias, Moga, muy interesante. Como todos nuestros panelistas, este llamado a la acción es bien importante, ¿no? No debemos esperar, el tiempo corre en contra nuestra y por eso debemos tomar acciones pronto. Más adelante ampliamos esta discusión. Vamos a darle paso a nuestro último panelista, director de Innovarte, Luis Villarroel. Él va a hablarnos sobre propiedad intelectual, monitoreo, especialmente el capítulo 3 y el tema transferencia de tecnología. Adelante, Luis.
Muchas gracias, Luz. Muchas gracias a quienes nos acompañan por el interés de participar de una manera informada en estas negociaciones. Yo no estoy en Ginebra, estoy muy lejos de ahí, pero sí, siguiendo los textos, y sobre eso es lo cual me quiero referir. No, me quiero sumar a la preocupación de este dilema que tenemos si es que aceptamos un tratado que resuelva los temas o solamente lo que nos quieran ofrecer los países en desarrollo. Y yo creo que la experiencia de la negociación de otros tratados como la OMC, en que los países entregaron propiedad intelectual a cambio de acceso a mercados, al final resultó eso digamos, muy en perjuicio de los países en desarrollo, de manera tal de que ahora, pensando el interés que tienen los países desarrollados en cuanto a lo que es el monitoreo de los patógenos, si nosotros entregamos eso sin obtener lo que sea equidad y acceso, no va a haber después espacio para poder, no vamos a tener con qué pedir que se dé a cambio más acceso. Ahora, en cuanto a los problemas que todavía no están resueltos, además a los que ya han mencionado los distinguidos panelistas, hay algunos temas que yo siento que se están mirando, digamos, sin la debida preocupación, porque si bien están en artículos que no son, digamos, las vedettes o lo más escandaloso, siento que están pasando bajo el radar y deberíamos preocuparnos. En primer lugar, y como problema no resuelto, es el tema de los abusos. cómo prevenir abusos, ya sea por parte de gobiernos o de las farmacéuticas. ¿Es eso un mecanismo de prevención o qué hace un país que se enfrenta a una farmacéutica que le está poniendo condiciones contractuales que son leoninas o que se niega a transferir cierta información que es necesaria para hacer efectiva puede hacer la producción en base a una licencia obligatoria, como ya vimos que pasó durante la pandemia de COVID, o de algún gobierno que se niega a permitir una licencia obligatoria de exportación, como fue el caso entre Bolivia y Canadá, en que Canadá se negó a otorgar la licencia de exportación. ¿Qué se puede hacer ahí? Entonces, siento que ese es un área en que tenemos que prestarle atención, porque puede ser que al final del día consigamos algunas concesiones, pero después no las podemos hacer efectivas debido al abuso que haga un Estado o una farmacéutica. Entonces, por eso nosotros llamamos la atención a lo que tiene que ver con monitoreo y con implementación. Y ahí nosotros tenemos, digamos, la idea que se debiera incluir dentro de lo que es el artículo 16, que tiene que ver con colaboración, justamente poner referencias a lo que es colaboración para afrontar alguna situación de abuso por parte de una farmacéutica de otro gobierno. En el caso de los ADPIC, en el artículo 40 se establece un mecanismo por el cual los miembros de ADPIC, en el caso de que haya eh, eh, una entidad de un tercer país que está cometiendo abusos a la competencia, el artículo 40 establece que ese país que está siendo afectado puede iniciar consultas con el país en el cual se origina esa empresa infractora. Entonces, creemos que se debería proponer un mecanismo similar dentro del artículo 16 sobre colaboración y cooperación internacional, un artículo que permita entablar consultas con los otros miembros en el caso de que se esté cometiendo un abuso por parte de alguna empresa de ese país. Eso por un lado. Y por el otro, sentimos que es fundamental que dentro del artículo 30, que tiene que ver con colaboración, perdón, con monitoreo e implementación, se tiene que incluir un mecanismo como el que tiene establecido ya los ADPIC con relación a lo que es la supervisión o el reporte público que hacen los países con relación a la implementación de los ADPIC, en los cuales el resto de los países pueden establecer consultas y pedir explicación por ciertas medidas. Entonces, por ejemplo, estoy pensando en este caso de Canadá, que se negó a dar la licencia obligatoria a Biolis, que es que entonces, y Bolivia no tuvo un espacio donde poder hacer el reclamo de por qué no se otorgaba la licencia obligatoria. Bueno, establecer dentro del capítulo 3 justamente un mecanismo similar al artículo 68 o 71 que tienen los ARTIC, que permita hacer revisiones periódicas, bianuales, en las cuales los países puedan consultar eh, a un país que está siendo evaluado por qué ha hecho o no ha hecho tal cosas. Parece que voy muy rápido. el, voy a bajar entonces la revolución. Entonces, estamos hablando de la necesidad de establecer medidas efectivas para el monitoreo y implementación que permita hacer accountable a países que están obstaculizando el ejercicio que tiene un país respecto, por ejemplo, de una flexibilidad, o bien de otra manera está afectando la correcta implementación del tratado. Entonces, y para eso proponemos que se modele del artículo 68 y 71 de los ADPIC un sistema de revisiones periódicas en que se pueden hacer esas consultas. También habíamos dicho con relación al artículo 16 que sobre colaboración se establezca también ahí un mecanismo en que reconozca la necesidad de colaboración en el caso de que haya un privado que esté cometiendo algún abuso respecto de un Estado miembro y ese Estado afectado pueda pedir consultas sobre el comportamiento de su privado en el país de origen. Ahora, saltándome de tema por el poco tiempo que tenemos, me quería referir a lo que tiene que ver con transparencia y confidencialidad, que también transparencia es un antídoto para abusos. Si bien en el artículo 3 se establecen en lo que tiene que ver con los principios, en el número 10 una obligación de transparencia, no hace referencia dentro de la transparencia a lo que son las condiciones contractuales de los contratos de suministro, que es donde normalmente se provocan los abusos más grandes por parte de la farmacéutica al momento de la distribución. Y además, el número 15 del artículo 3 establece una norma que garantiza la protección protección de datos y confidencialidad. Entonces, ahí se genera un problema de una, digamos, derogación tácita o bien limitación clara en que las normas que tienen que ver con transparencia no deben afectar lo que se considera confidencial. Y normalmente eso va a ser los acuerdos o cláusulas dentro de los contratos de suministro y en otro tipo de contratos. Entonces, es fundamental que en el artículo 15 expresamente se excluya de la protección de la confidencialidad a lo que tiene que ver con los contratos de acuerdo sobre adquisiciones de productos relacionados con la pandemia. También en confidencialidad no hay una referencia en cuanto a que se elimina la confidencialidad respecto de las pruebas clínicas. En el artículo 9 de investigación y desarrollo que trata pruebas clínicas, falta hacer alguna referencia que establezca que las pruebas clínicas serán de libre disposición, a lo menos para efectos de las autorizaciones sanitarias en caso de pandemia, pero el ideal es que quedasen fuera de la posibilidad de protección de datos, digamos, de información no divulgada y de confidencialidad. El otro tema que quisiera, ¿me quedan un minuto? ¿Cuánto me queda, Luz? ¿O ya me pasé?
Ya te pasaste, te
Ah,
regalo 30
dos.
segundos.
Bueno, en propiedad intelectual, que es, como ya se ha dicho, el artículo actual 11, 11.5 y 11.6 no está aportando mucho. Sí tiene un valor que haya una obligación de actualización y revisión de las leyes, pero no se hace cargo del gran problema o la inequidad que significa que los países que no tienen capacidad de producción no encuentren quien les exporte por la limitación que hay en la exportación, que eso está en el artículo 31F de los ADMIT. Entonces, creemos que es esencial que se aborde el tema del artículo 31F y se establezca alguna fórmula de limitación a la aplicación del 31F, que, entre paréntesis, fue parte del waiver, como un estándar en caso de pandemia. Y, igualmente, fundamental que se expresen cuáles son todas las normas que tienen que ser revisadas para tener una implementación de la flexibilidad. Tengo otras galletas que compartir con ustedes, pero me las guardo y quedo a su disposición. Gracias, Luz, por...
Muchas gracias, Luis. Como ya observan todos y escucharon todos, tenemos muchas dificultades con este texto que está ajustándose y redactándose. De ello tenemos que resaltar que hay problemas y continúa la inequidad, ¿no? El texto no es claro, como decía Moga, las palabras que se utilizan dentro del texto no son vinculantes y las propuestas que hay tampoco son equitativas para los países, como es el caso de las bases de datos, lo que tiene que ver con patógenos. em, muy seguramente los países del sur van a dar un gran aporte, pero el beneficio y la retribución va a ser mínima, ¿no? Porque proveer la información de un patógeno para que se pueda desarrollar una vacuna o un tratamiento y que después estos países tengan que comprarlo a un alto costo, no es equidad y no es justicia. Em, Hay bastante desinformación, los textos no son transparentes ni claros. El tema del financiamiento también es un tema que se ha discutido mucho, y me voy a referir a las sugerencias a las cuales se refirió Rachel, sobre los compromisos específicos que cambien ese status quo en el cual unos países se benefician de los otros y no es un beneficio común. Si alguno de ustedes, señores y señoras participantes y todos los asistentes, tiene alguna pregunta, puede levantar la mano o puede escribirla en el chat y yo con mucho gusto se la transmito a los panelistas. Si no entienden algún punto específico, tal vez porque no le han hecho seguimiento a todo el tratado y a todo el proceso de ajuste del texto, con mucho gusto pueden hacer la pregunta, así les parezca que bueno, es una pregunta sencilla, pero pues eso va a permitir que todos reforcemos la información. Manuel Machado de Colombia, creo que ¿tienes la palabra?
Sí,
Te
buenos
pre-
días, ¿me escuchan?
sí, perfecto.
Sí, mira,
Adelante.
Yo soy Manuel Machado de la Fundación Misión Salud de Colombia, efectivamente. Ya había tenido la oportunidad de trabajar contigo, Luz, en algunos escenarios previos. Entonces, digamos que es más una pregunta general, no tiene un taller específico. Es más para saber si desde el subglobal van a continuar con más iniciativas, como las que están manejando en estos momentos, porque desde Misión Salud nos interesa como participar en algunas de ellas, ya sea en la construcción de documentos o en el apoyo de iniciativas, porque por lo menos nosotros como fundación, nosotros enviamos los comentarios a tratado pandémico en el marco de la consulta USTR que propició Public Citizen hace unas semanas. Entonces, digamos que es más como la disposición que tenemos nosotros para participar, porque efectivamente hemos tomado nota de todos estos puntos que los expositores han manifestado y estamos de acuerdo. Era más eso, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Manuel. Pues bienvenido. Estamos aquí para generar estrategias que nos permitan cambiar ese status quo del cual hablaba Rachel anteriormente y podamos cambiar lo que está escrito, porque no es suficiente y continúa favoreciendo a los países más desarrollados. em, un recordatorio para quienes quieran participar, hablar despacio para que nuestras traductoras puedan transmitir el mensaje de forma adecuada. Seguimos con el micrófono abierto para quien quiera hacer alguna pregunta. Em, no sé, para quienes de pronto están llegando, no sé si Gopa nos podrías de pronto ampliar un poquito este tema de los patógenos que ha sido un poco bastante discutido recientemente y no todas las personas asistentes tienen el conocimiento. ¿Podrías hablar un poco más de eso para que la gente conozca las implicaciones de lo que...
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Am I audible or is it a, audio disturbance? Because my mic is sometimes can create problem, but I think it's working well. Um, so, no, normally what happens in any event of an outbreak of disease, normally the countries collect that pathogens along with many other clinical information they give sent to WHO. through the IHR arrangement, or even otherwise also they'll send it. So based on this information plays a crucial role in developing the response strategies, including biomedical strategies as well as other interventions to respond to that outbreak. But especially when it comes to the development of health products like diagnostics, vaccines, and medicines, these pathogen samples are very important. So till recently, or till say 15 years ago or something, pathogen samples needs to be shared in its physical form. Now it is not required. You can basically send the genetic sequence information and you can upload that information. Most of you might be aware of that the how the Moderna developed the vaccine. They got the genetic sequence uploaded by the Chinese researchers, and from there they developed the vaccine in 48 hours. So this means the sharing of pathogens or their genetic sequence data is very important. But keep in mind that in many cases, the science is still enable you to develop the vaccine without any physical sample. But physical sample in certain contexts are very important to test it, though computer-based testing is possible, but you would like to have a physical sample. So both are important that way. Uh, so what? So this sharing is very important. That way, you look at this issue. Every country in the system internationally is contributing to develop the vaccines or medicines or diagnostics. But what happens is that after development, these products are protected through intellectual property rights and owned by the pharmaceutical companies. And they even prevent others from producing this. So it is like a winner takes all situation, right? So that is the heart of this issue. And this kind of winner takes all uh, approach goes against the international law, because the Convention on Biodiversity and Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing declares these pathogens as sovereign property of the countries, and access to these uh, genetic resources or genetic materials is also comes with a corresponding obligation to share the benefit emerging out of research you carried out on these genetic materials. So what the developing countries are asking here is that whenever there is a pathogen sharing or its genetic sequence data, there should be a mechanism to share the benefit. How they can share this benefit is the following ways: monetary and non-monetary ways. Most important thing is that whenever there is an outbreak, there should be an obligation to share certain percentage of the product through WHO, so it can be used to countries which do not have the manufacturing capabilities. And further, if there is a COVID-like situation, a single manufacturer may not able to satisfy the demand, then there should be a compulsory technology transfer. And the system to run the whoever is making any kind of commercial activity or when research activity need to contribute to, so they should subscribe, they should pay an annual fee to get the samples. So this is the proposal in gist. What this the question then comes, oh, is this a new idea altogether? Not at all. WHO already has a framework to share benefit of emerging out of pathogens related to influenza. That's called PIP framework, Pandemic Influenza Prepared Framework. Under that, pharmaceutical companies contribute nearly $28 million every year to get the samples of influenza virus pathogens. Based on that, they develop the influenza vaccine. So this system is existing, but is only limited to influenza virus. But here the proposal is to expand to cover all the pathogens which has a potential to become a pandemic, as well as pathogens which may result or which can cause a public health emergency of international concern. So the proposal is to expanding the scope and to create a system without touching the influenza virus benefit sharing mechanism, because which is already existing. So this is the demand, and this is the best way to address an inequity existing in the health international health emergency. So most of you, I am going through the list of participants. I can see many of them are from the public health discipline, and they, one of their important criticism about global health is that it continued the colonial legacy, especially the health emergency regime. So this is the colonial legacy. What you share the information, but you don't get the benefit. And when you ask for the benefit, it is termed as a charity. It is not a charity because you are contributing to the R&D by sequencing the data or sending the samples intact and contributing to the development of the products, but you are not getting the benefit. So PAP's system or PAP's proposal is to obtain a fair, to get a benefit which is on, which is to be shared on a fair and equitable basis. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Gopa. Creo que a todos nos queda claro que este punto es básico. La información es clave para todos los países y la información debe estar disponible para todos. Un poco siguiendo, tengo aquí la mano levantada de Ragnia. Adelante, Ragnia.
Gracias, Luz. Yo tengo una pregunta a los panelistas. Yo la voy a hacer en inglés. So I have a question to the panelists. Some of you mentioned and framed as a dilemma the fact that the deadline of the pandemic instrument is closing, and that supposedly there won't be political energy to continue negotiations. So my question is, what is the litmus test on this, right? So until when should countries make concessions, and what are the limits that countries shouldn't accept at all, and that we should really consider the fact that maybe it's better not to have such an instrument? I don't know if I'm framing it correctly, and but yeah, so that's my question. And how also, like, how do this scenario, what does this scenario have to do with the international health regulations? How these political positions that civil society has to take in regards to this both of these instruments, right? I understand they are very connected, and how giving one up or not, right? How pushing for a decision, how should the position of civil society take place in both of these spaces, right? In both of these fronts, and in connection to each other. Thank you.
Moka, would you like to answer? Please go first, then I'll come.
I will start. First, can you hear me clearly?
Perfecto.
Okay, good.
Ujú.
Because there was a problem with my sound. Okay, so just to say what we can accept and can't accept, or what developing countries can accept or not accept. As I said, this is negotiation, so it's unlikely that we will get everything we want, but there are critical things that we have to push for. So things like when it's important, for important issues about access, to have obligations on developing countries, like in sharing the pathogen, as Gopa said, or in surveillance, but not to have other obligations to continue with the rest of the other important things for access, for equity, to have them as encourage, promote, on this weak language. That's unacceptable, because that doesn't change what is happening. That doesn't guarantee that there will be equity with the next pandemic. It actually guarantees that we'll have the same situation with a little bit of doses, kind of charity of pharmaceutical companies. That is just not, it's not acceptable. The second point that I think it's important, the fact that developed countries or rich countries are sticking to their points doesn't mean that we should accept that as a like, that's it, fait accompli, nothing will change. I think we still have time as civil society, but also as supporting developing countries, the Equity Group and the Africa Group, to continue pushing and sticking to their collective point. I think in negotiation, normally, some countries, I mean, the EU is notorious for that, they go for divide and rule. So a little bit of, you know, this word or this sentence or this whatever is okay, and then a country in the South accepts it and try to break that solid line that the countries have. So I think first, stick together. Second is the two messages that we have to say to our negotiators: stick together and stick to your demands, because they are feasible. The third point is they are feasible. It's not like written in the Quran or in the Bible that developed countries will get what they want every time. We might not get everything we want, but at least we need to get critical things like the access and benefit sharing, the conditionalities on R&D, commitment to technology transfer, commitment to enabling local production, good financing mechanisms that are sustained financing, and that also we get commitment from our own countries into investing and prioritizing health systems, for example, investing and prioritizing medical research. That has to be a commitment from our own countries as well. Just my last point is that you have good points to raise. Please raise them with your country, with your national ministry or whoever is responsible to direct the negotiator. So that is critical, that they have these comments from you, and if you can share it with the region at a minimum, with the, so you know, so Latin America, for example, you're from Colombia, you share it with Colombia and the whole Latin America region if you can. I think that is really, really essential. Thank you.
Gracias, Moga. Adelante, Moga.
Thank you. Thank you, Luz. To complement what Moga has said, and also Rania referred this term litmus test. What should be the litmus test? I would say the litmus test should be whether there is a legal obligation to ensure concrete deliverables on equity issues. But to make it much more clear, whether these legal provision in the pandemic instrument as well as in IHR, if they are able to provide a predictable and sustainable supply of health products in case of an outbreak, then developing countries should accept that. Otherwise, if it's on a best endeavor terms, like a country shall promote, country shall endeavor, that means there is no predictability. In that case, developing countries should not accept it, because nothing to lose in a way. Because what developed countries are asking, providing more information, more sample sharing, and at the same time not ready to share the benefit. So therefore, until and unless there is a concrete deliverables, and which is stitched through the legal obligations to share that, then only developing countries should agree. Otherwise, they should not agree, because in WTO, we always say a no deal is better than a bad deal. So here also it applies.
Gracias, Copa. Rachel, adelante.
One quick point from me is that now that countries are going into negotiation mode, what we're starting to see very clearly is the potential trade-offs and where they might be. And I think from civil society, it's worth acknowledging and being aware of where those trade-offs may be happening. Because in one case, for example, conditions on public funding, we might see movement on that. You know, we have some key countries who were against are now potentially coming to some sort of compromise. That in itself, in a silo, can be seen as a very good thing. But if it's only done because they want to be able to trade that off against something else, for example, access and benefit sharing in Article 12, then that's not going to be the best case scenario, right? So I think that we just have to be careful, and this is all of us, that while we see some potential progress in some areas, we have to be very aware of where there is not so much progress and what the compromises might be. And I think this goes back to speaking together, acknowledging that different organizations will be focusing on different articles and different aspects, and being able to come together to understand where these issues are landing, because otherwise we could be celebrating something that takes us one step forward here but three steps back here. Thank you.
Gracias, Rachel. Clave este tema. Todos los temas están interrelacionados y muchas veces nos enfocamos en uno solo y tenemos que estar pendientes de todos porque las consecuencias pueden ser adversas si no tenemos en cuenta todos los aspectos. Luis, adelante.
Gracias. Bueno, sumándome a lo que ya han dicho y también tal vez reiterando un poco la importancia de no ceder lo que es el acceso a los patógenos hasta que no hayan realmente condiciones o mejoras en términos de lo que tiene que ver con equidad. El, especialmente yo llamaría la atención, creo que es algo que es corto y también difícil, es arreglar ese artículo 15, o sea, perdón, el número 315 que tiene que ver con confidencialidad. Creo que si se mantiene como está, puede ser fatal en términos de control de prácticas abusivas y también de acceso a datos de prueba clínicos. O sea, si hay un artículo que yo le doy importancia, es ese artículo 15. 10, perdón, el artículo 3, número 15. Y también en el tema del artículo 30 sobre monitoreo, creo que es fundamental que se establezcan mecanismos que permitan, ¿no es cierto?, denunciar o buscar solución en el caso de abusos, porque eso, si no tenemos un mecanismo de esa naturaleza, vamos a seguir sujetos a prácticas que son muy perjudiciales para nuestros países. Eso.
Gracias, Luis. Yo tengo una pregunta para Rachel. Una de las, digamos que de las cosas que me ha preocupado a mí es el tema del desarrollo de producción regional. El fortalecimiento de los centros de investigación para que se pueda producir en determinado caso una vacuna, un tratamiento, un dispositivo médico, lo que sea que se necesitare en el caso de una pandemia. Hasta el momento, digamos que ha habido algunos pilotos en Brasil y en África. Sin embargo, la preocupación es la capacidad de distribución de estos productos a nivel regional, ¿no? La fortaleza, digamos que ha sido un poco hacia los países que son quienes están conformando este hub, pero la región en sí todavía no tiene digamos que un soporte para enfrentar una pandemia. ¿Qué consideras tú que debería estar incluido en el texto para que realmente esa producción regional no sea solo a nivel nacional, sino que pueda tener un soporte para que los países que definitivamente no tienen capacidad de producción se puedan ver favorecidos y no tengan que seguir en esa lista de espera? Gracias.
Great. I'll start, but I know that Moga and Luis and Gopa have a lot of expertise on particular regional manufacturing and production. So I'll pass over to them as well. I think there's two things for me. There's one on, there's a rightly so a lot of focus on needing to increase geographically diverse manufacturing and production capacity. And without a doubt, that is incredibly important. But I think what also is needing to be mirrored, and the new text deals with this to a certain degree, is that a recognition that there also needs to be, as you touched upon, R&D capacities. So the capacities to be able to do the research, both regionally and nationally as well, which goes back to Moga's point earlier, which is that all countries need to invest in national and regional capabilities of research as well as manufacturing and production. Because, as we said before, this is talking about self-sufficiency as well as preparedness. And the investment aspects of this is incredibly important. So that's the first bit about investment. And I think the second part is about going back to a little bit about this trade-off. I think that there's potentially an opening in the R&D capacities as well as the manufacturing capacities, because as Moga was saying, manufacturing capacities in itself, you need to have something to produce. So you need to have tech transfer, and you need to have an ability to deal with the intellectual property so that you can have something to produce. And they're so interlinked together that you need to both invest in and be able to have the right tools and the right knowledge transfer in the right way to make all of that work together. But I will pass over to other panelists who know much more about the the manufacturing and distribution aspects than I do.
So
Adelante, Gopa.
thank you. Just to pitch in a few points. The first thing is that there is a article dealing with sustainable production. Similarly, there is an article dealing with technology transfer and article dealing with production. So Article 10, 11, and 13. So these are these articles, but the problem with these articles is that they are not properly cross-referenced or interconnected. And the second problem is that there is no international coordination mechanism to achieve what is meant for in this article or objectives of this article. So, for example, Article 10, it's very good. It's basically tells that every country or region should have a designated manufacturing facility or facilities for pandemic-related products. It's a good idea, but you can designate the products, but it does not offer a mechanism wherein which the technology will be given to these facilities so they can start the production. And what kind of products. So these are the issues to be tackled. So for that, you need a coordination mechanism at the international level. So all the obligations are now put it on parties, no obligation on WHO. The WHO is the best agency to coordinate that at the international level. So we need responsibilities on WHO. Now WHO is like a power without responsibilities, right? We want to change that, and we should give some responsibilities to WHO to make it happen. So that is a missing element. Yeah. So we need to push for that.
Gracias. Excelente. Mecanismos de coordinación. Yo creo que eso es algo que tenemos que insistir en, porque no un país, no solo un país o una región sale adelante sola. Necesitamos esos mecanismos de coordinación que aún no son claros en el Tratado Moga. Adelante.
So yes, coordination, and yes, WHO to coordinate, not another public-private partnership sitting outside and raising money and ruled by Gates and Co. that is fine. However, it should be really clear that we're not creating another COVAX or Act A, even inside WHO, because the idea is that if we talk about self-sustained and like sustainable, like for a long time, then we talk about regional coordination. It is time that the regions take the responsibility and the leadership of investing, which means, I mean, I work with the Africa region, so I know bits about Latin America, but not much. So we've got the Africa CDC. They have plans for vaccines. They have plans for medicine. They have plans for diagnostics. Now, how do you implement this plan without the countries, the African countries, prioritizing health, for a start, healthcare, and then medical research, and then local production? I mean, prioritize it in reality by actually giving it the political power and the financial resources, or some of it. Then you can negotiate with other countries. Just on the R&D hubs, I mean, let's face it, when WHO wanted to create a hub for mRNA, it went for the countries that can receive the technology, and that's South Africa. I mean, we should have, okay, South Africa is a good thing. They're sharing the technology with 15 other centers, including in Africa and elsewhere, including Latin America and Asia and everywhere else. Then, so that's a good model. And I can't see much reference to that as a model, the mRNA hub, as a model, and to encourage countries to invest in R&D, to encourage regions to go for regional hub. So WHO doesn't have to create another hub for, I don't know, viral vaccines or some other technology, but it's the region can do that. And ask for WHO technical advice, of course. Ask for help from donors financially and technologically, but you invest first in your own country, in your own capacity. And the other thing is, not every country can aim to produce the same vaccine or the same medicine, because then you will compete against the other in the market. But to produce something, let's say a vaccine, you don't need to have it from the start of research to the actual vials in a cardboard box with the, the vials can be made in one country, the ingredients in another country, the cardboard box in another country, that whatever in another country, and therefore there is kind of a regional integration in the production. Eventually you have that vaccine is a regional vaccine. It's not Kenyan vaccine, it's not Tanzanian vaccine, it's a regional vaccine. That needs a shift in mentality in our own countries to do that. In Latin America, you have a wonderful example of procurement. So you have PAHO procuring on behalf of all countries. They put the money up front and then the countries pay later. But the countries pool their own demand. I want 100 doses of vaccines. This other country needs 5. You put the 105, you can negotiate good deal for all of them. And that's what PAHO does. So we do have examples of regional work together on access to medicine. We should do that on R&D and regional hubs for R&D and regional production.
Gracias, Moga. Gopa, no sé si tienes la mano levantada o es que olvidaste bajarla. Bueno, hemos visto...
It's an old hand.
Okay. Bueno, para todos ustedes, como pueden darse cuenta, son varios temas que tienen que ver con dificultades en el fondo del texto, en lo que se trata en el texto, que refleja inequidad, como nos mencionaba Gopa, como nos mencionó Moga, Luis, Rachel. Tenemos inequidades en cuanto a compartir información, en cuanto a cómo nos vamos a ver beneficiados. y digamos que ese es un punto que tenemos que tener claro. Otro punto que tenemos que tener claro es en la forma, el lenguaje que se está utilizando. Es un lenguaje que no vincula, que no compromete, que simplemente queda como a voluntad de los países de cumplir o no este compromiso que se va a firmar. La línea de base que hablaba Rachel desde dónde se parte, ¿no? Se están viendo las particularidades de cada país y cómo cambiar ese status quo. El monitoreo del que hablaba Luis, yo creo que es clave y es algo de lo que no se había discutido mucho anteriormente y sin embargo es algo que debe existir junto con esos mecanismos de coordinación. ¿Cómo podemos participar? Yo creo que el objetivo de esta reunión, el primero era informar, que ustedes conozcan un poco más sobre qué es lo que está pasando, que el tiempo corre en contra nuestra. En la Asamblea Mundial de la Salud se acordó presentar un texto definitivo. Sin embargo, como ustedes se pueden dar cuenta, este texto todavía es muy incipiente y no cumple con las expectativas con las que se pretendió, que se tenían al comienzo. ¿Cómo podemos participar? Yo creo que es importante que contactemos a las comisiones que están representando a los países, a los ministerios de salud y a estas autoridades que ustedes consideren en cada uno de sus países que pueden estar tratando estos temas, tratar de tener contacto con ellos, tratar de dirigir comunicados. Las organizaciones que están organizando este webinar, estamos con mucho gusto disponibles para apoyarles si ustedes desean, pero es importante que a nivel nacional se hagan los contactos y que se inste a los gobiernos a defender las posiciones particulares de cada país. Eh, una pandemia no es algo que sea muy lejano, es muy posible que tengamos nuevas pandemias muy pronto y cada vez va a ser más difícil, ¿no? Porque ese mismo status quo nos ha acostumbrado a dejar pasar y esperar a ver, ¿no? ¿Qué pasa en el momento de la emergencia? No podemos arriesgar más vidas y es una responsabilidad, yo creo que de cada una de las personas estar informado y tratar de contactar a esos gobiernos. Los invitamos a participar y a difundir estas campañas que se están realizando desde People's Vaccine Alliance, desde Acción Internacional por la Salud y todas las organizaciones que nos replican sobre la información y sobre seguir insistiendo a los gobiernos. Es importante que cada uno de estos aspectos se tengan en cuenta. No, cada uno no es un aspecto independiente. El tema del desarrollo de producción, el tema de la inversión, cómo los países pueden invertir desde sus propias capacidades, el tema del lenguaje, el tema de las bases de datos de los patógenos. Todos son temas importantes. No podemos sacar uno adelante y con eso esperar que el tratado sea exitoso. Entonces, pues los invitamos a que nos acompañen en futuras reuniones, que nos contacten si tienen algunas dudas y a que contacten a las comisiones de sus países y les cuenten de estas preocupaciones que se han venido presentando desde diferentes sectores del sur global específicamente. No sé si alguno de los compañeros organizadores, de los panelistas, tienen alguna otra cosa que agregar. Les recuerdo las sugerencias que nos hacía Rachel desde D&DI, los compromisos específicos que a los gobiernos se les exija asumir compromisos específicos, el tema de la transparencia y que se puedan conocer los textos reales, ¿no? Adelante, si alguno tiene la palabra y ya vamos cerrando nuestra reunión del día de hoy.
Luzma, yo solo te... Ah, bueno, Moga está respondiendo. Es que Pablo dejó una pregunta ahí en el
Ay, lo
Q&A.
siento, no le alcanzo, no tengo acceso, no, algo pasa en el chat, pero no puedo verlo. No, perfecto, muchas gracias. Bueno, acá la tengo, tú me la enviaste. Dice,
I think
hablando,
there's a group of NGOs who are dealing with focusing on the human rights aspect on this treaty, this accord. I don't know if they shared this particular document. I didn't share it. I don't know if they was shared, but I expect that they shared it because they are, and they spoke in the meeting about human rights, and they spoke in the previous INB about integrating human rights, not just as a principle, one little sentence, but actually what it means in the article. So thank you. But I'll make sure I'll take that on with delegates. Thank you for reminding me.
gracias, Moga. Akemi, adelante, tienes la mano levantada. Akemi Bustamante, ¿me escuchas? Bueno, ¿alguien más quiere contarnos algo para cerrar? Antes de cerrar. Ok, Javier Llamosa tiene la mano levantada. Adelante. Javier, no puedo escuchar, no sé si en el chat has escrito algo, Javier. No sé, Ragnia, si me puedes.
Yo no
Dice
lo veo. Yo no sé si él salió tal vez de la sala.
que no tiene audio. Está en el usuario Akemi.
Ah,
Bustamante.
dale. Listo. Ahora sí puedes hablar.
Ok, gracias. Bueno, en principio, agradecer la participación de todos, ha sido muy, muy importante lo que se ha expresado por todos los expositores, pero y Rache decía algo importante, ¿no? Si bien es cierto, se viene haciendo una negociación importante y compromisos, también nos toca en la región y a la sociedad civil del sur global cómo empujamos una agenda de articulación regional para que la transferencia de tecnología logre ubicarse en un centro no solamente de investigación y desarrollo, sino de producción que pueda abastecer a toda la región, ¿no? Si bien es cierto, han habido esfuerzos de compras regionales para salvar un problema determinado, aún no tenemos una propuesta sostenible. Y esa propuesta sostenible nace de este cambio de chip de cómo se articula la región para responder de una manera eficiente, ¿no? En la negociación se habla de fortalecer los centros de vigilancia epidemiológica, pero también debe fortalecerse los centros de investigación y desarrollo, porque cada país hace su propia investigación y lo vienen haciendo en más o menos rigor, más o menos capacidad, más o menos rapidez o temas que vienen abordando, pero lo que no hay en la región es la capacidad de escalamiento, de la producción a gran escala de aquello que se investiga en cada uno de nuestros países frente a sus propios problemas. Y la transferencia de tecnología no debe darse cuando se dé una pandemia. Este es un acuerdo de preparación y prevención. Y si nos vamos a preparar, ya debe obligarse a la transferencia tecnológica para tener la plataforma tecnológica de producir en ARN mensajero en más de un país del sur global, ¿no? Entonces, quería comentar eso y sí nos queda claro ahora a todos nosotros de la sociedad civil el esfuerzo que tenemos que hacer por lograr la articulación de la región y responder de una manera regional frente a estos problemas, ¿no?
Excelente, Javier. Bueno, si no hay más preguntas o comentarios, creo que vamos cerrando por el día de hoy. Muchas gracias a todos por su tiempo, por su asistencia. Recuerden que estamos disponibles en todas las organizaciones, recibiendo sugerencias y para que podamos lograr estrategias coordinadas. Muchas gracias a todos los panelistas, excelentes presentaciones, aunque nos dejan un poco preocupados. Creo que hay mucho trabajo por hacer y ese es precisamente el impulso que se genera, ¿no? Esas preocupaciones. Esperamos verles pronto y que tengan un excelente resto de día.
Muchas gracias, Luz. Felicitaciones. Chao.
Chao.
Thank you for running this webinar and thank you for moderating.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Chao, Morgan.
Ciao.
Un abrazo a todos.